Hello, greetings to all, I'm Quaizero Laogao. Recently, numerous viewers have left remarks expressing their hope that we can discuss MH370, the vanished Malaysia Airlines flight. We will address this topic in the future, but today we're going to delve into a remarkably similar incident. In the year 1943, amidst the turmoil of World War II, this aircraft that mysteriously vanished was a heavy bomber associated with the United States military forces. It unexpectedly disappeared while making its way back from a mission, and the 9 crew members aboard vanished without leaving any trace along with the aircraft. As the plane was returning over the Mediterranean Sea, the United States military presumed it had plunged into the sea. As a result, they conducted extensive searches of the sea continuously. Yet even after numerous years, they were unable to locate even a single fragment of debris. So it's a bit like the MH370 incident, where there is absolutely no information. This plane had 9 crew members, including the captain, co-pilot, navigator, and bombardier, who were officers, along with 5 enlisted men, making a total of 9 people. There was an aerial oil exploration plane belonging to the WWII Oil Company of the UK. While passing over the Sahara Desert, this oil exploration plane had a pilot and a geologist on board. Can the plane also explore for oil just by having the geologist look down and use remote viewing? It's not remote viewing. It might be able to determine which areas look like they have oil through the terrain, which is quite impressive. In this vast desert, there's nothing in sight. As he kept looking, he got quite tired, but then he suddenly noticed there was an airplane in the middle of the desert. He found it very strange and thought, how could there be a plane in this uninhabited place? So after the plane returned, he contacted the US Air Force Base in Libya through their company and reported that while searching for oil, he discovered the wreckage of a plane in the middle of the desert. The US Air Force checked their records and said that this was not one of our World War II battlefields. We also didn't have any missions to carry out in that area, and since he mentioned the location somewhat vaguely, the US military didn't pay much attention to it. WWII Oil Company has dispatched another ground team into the expansive desert following the completion of aerial surveys with the purpose of verifying the findings on the ground. This ground team is composed of 3 experienced geologists along with several local guides or assistants. Upon entering the desert, the team has 2 primary tasks. The first is to search for oil, and the second is to locate an aircraft. Why is WWII Oil Company so particularly interested in this aircraft? It's because in the desert everything looks the same, making it very difficult to find a landmark. They thought this plane would make an excellent landmark, making it easier for them to explore for oil in the future. So they sent the team to find the plane. It took the team 2 weeks in the desert to finally locate the plane. After they discovered it, they uncovered numerous astonishing aspects of the aircraft. The airplane was fractured in 2 from the center but remained largely intact. The tires still contained air, the engine was still capable of turning, and there was sustenance and water. The radio and everything else were in pristine condition, with the flight logbook and maintenance manual entirely complete. Remarkably, there was even a thermos inside the plane, and the coffee within it was still drinkable. The aircraft had no corrosion whatsoever, possibly due to the arid desert climate. It was determined that there was no water, and it was very dry. This team then entered the plane, looking around and searching everywhere. They found some clothes with people's names written on them, and noted them all down. They discovered that there were no bodies inside the plane, no one at all, and there were no parachutes or life vests either. So at the time, they thought, oh, maybe the people on the plane had parachuted out. But if the people on the plane had parachuted out, how did the plane land? It didn't seem like it had crashed, and there was no explosion. It had just landed smoothly. The team then recorded all this information. They got up, took some items from the plane, and then continued to explore for their oil. After finishing the oil exploration, they returned to the UK in April. Within this team, there was a person named Bowman. He knew a lieutenant colonel in the US Air Force, so he wrote a letter to this lieutenant colonel. In the letter, he mentioned that they found a plane in the desert, included the plane's serial number, and listed some names that were written on clothes found on the plane. Oh, it was written in great detail about what was inside the plane. The US Air Force Lieutenant Colonel was very surprised upon receiving this letter, and immediately had the Air Force check what was going on with the plane with that serial number. The Air Force checked and said, hey, we don't have this plane. The Lieutenant Colonel felt something was off, as this was their plane. So he contacted the US military headquarters in Europe, but they also had no relevant information. They immediately reached out to the Pentagon, which is the US Department of Defense. Here, we need to mention why the US Air Force had no related information. It's because the US Air Force was established after World War II, and during the war, those planes belonged to the Army and Navy, as there was no Air Force at that time. The plane we're discussing belonged to the Army, so the Department of Defense sent the info to them. The US Army checked and found it. However, finding this information left them astonished. They said that this plane went missing on April 4th, 1943, and has not been found to this day. According to the records, the plane might have crashed in the Mediterranean Sea, which is thousands of kilometers away from the information provided in the desert, making it completely impossible for it to be in the Japanese location. The US Army immediately contacted the Air Force stationed in Libya, asking if they could send a team to take a look. The Air Force dispatched a team and they quickly arrived at the location. Upon inspection, they found that everything matched the information provided by the oil company. The anomalies were correct, and the information on the plane was accurate. They also believed there were too many mysteries, questioning where the people on the plane went and how the plane could land if they had parachuted out. We have absolutely no understanding of why no human remains were discovered in the vast areas surrounding the aircraft. Well, locating remains in the desert ought to be straightforward, but it is indeed somewhat challenging. Ultimately, throughout this search mission, 5 bodies were discovered 130 kilometers to the northwest of the aircraft. These 5 bodies were verified to be the 5 crew members from the plane. Subsequently, 38 kilometers farther northwest from these 5 individuals, another person was located, and 42 kilometers further northwest, yet another individual was found. Altogether, 7 individuals have been found. Then, another person was found in a different area, making it 8 people found. The 9th person remains missing. The most significant aspect is that within the co-pilot's pocket, a diary was discovered, which reconstructed the entire truth of the incident. Indeed, it was documented at that time, and without this diary, we wouldn't have known what transpired because the aircraft's presence at this location was a mystery. Based on the entries in this diary, let's reconstruct the truth of this incident for everyone. On April 4th, 1943, the United States military executed a large-scale bombing of Naples port, which is located in Italy. Their aircraft also took off from Libya, crossed the Mediterranean, and headed to Naples port in Italy for a bombing mission that day. There were a total of 25 B-24 bombers, and it was one of them. These 25 planes took off in 2 waves, with the first wave of 12 planes going first. It belonged to the second wave of 13 heavy bombers. After these 13 planes took off, the weather was extremely bad. There was strong wind, and some turned back, but he was one of the 4 who didn't. These 4 planes kept going to Naples port. However, as I said earlier, the weather was really harsh. He couldn't see the bombing target below, so he didn't drop the bombs and returned. On the way back, the plane was still carrying bombs. So, he just dropped the bomb into the Mediterranean Sea because it was too heavy. Normally, if they kept flying, they could return to their Libyan airbase in a few hours, but due to the strong winds that day, the plane flew much faster than expected. The captain didn't realize this, and thought it would take another 2 or 3 hours to get there. What transpired? He arrived at the airbase earlier than anticipated, and with the inclement weather conditions, he was unable to see below. The sea and the desert looked quite similar, so he had no idea he had already flown inland and thought he was still over the sea. However, as he continued flying, he felt he was nearing the base, but when he looked, it didn't resemble the base at all. He contacted the Air Force base and asked if there was an issue with their direction. At that time, the Libyan Air Force base was very rudimentary. There were no structures, and the flight crew rested in tents. They utilized an antenna to determine the position of the aircraft. This antenna was a unidirectional type. It only identified the direction of the aircraft, but not the distance. Consequently, even when the aircraft flew past, they wouldn't be aware. There was a navigator on the plane who mentioned that due to the wind, it appeared that our plane was slightly off course, and recommended adjusting the angle slightly. He adjusted the angle a bit and kept flying. After 2 more hours, until 2 a.m., the plane's fuel was almost gone. The captain said, "Why aren't we there yet? If we don't get there soon, this plane will crash." At that point, he had 2 options. One was to make an emergency landing at sea. The other option was for everyone to parachute out. He felt that the risk of a forced landing was too high, and he wanted to get out and swim back. He didn't know there was land below. He thought they were over the sea, so they all parachuted. When they jumped, they realized, oh my, we're on land. At that time, they were all wearing life jackets, preparing for a sea landing. Once they landed and found themselves on the ground, they thought they might have overshot the base by some distance. Since they parachuted, everyone landed in different places. They took out signal flares and fired them into the sky to get an idea of everyone's location. Out of 9 people, 8 gathered in one place. One individual never appeared, so they assumed that this person might have perished as a result of the parachute jump. After the 8 of them assembled together, the aircraft continued to fly onward on autopilot, and they didn't concern themselves with it. In reality, the plane flew an additional 26 kilometers and landed smoothly on its own. Considering the manner in which the plane landed, these individuals could have safely landed without the necessity of piloting it. After they parachuted, they descended and landed on the ground, realizing that they might be in a desert area relatively close to the base. Consequently, they concluded that based on the direction and angle, if they walked a few additional kilometers northwest, they should be able to reach the base. To assist the individuals at the base in locating them more easily, they cut their parachutes into pieces and scattered the pieces on the ground. They threw their clothes, shoes, and socks on the ground as they walked towards the base, thinking it wasn't far away. In reality, they were 700 kilometers away from the base. These people walked for 5 days and 5 of them couldn't make it. The desert was nearly 50 degrees during the day and 0 at night. When they parachuted, they didn't have much with them, only a bucket of water. There was only a little water in the bucket, and 8 people shared it as they walked for 5 days. 5 of them couldn't continue. Then they said, "You keep going, we'll stay here and wait for you to come back and rescue us." The remaining 3 continued forward, but one of them couldn't make it and collapsed, leaving 2 to keep moving forward. Another one fell, and finally the youngest person survived and made it the farthest. However, his body was never found. How do we know he made it the farthest then? Well, in a desert in the UK, a search team reported that in 153 they discovered a body. This body was in the direction he was heading, closer to the Air Force Base. At the time, they didn't realize it was an American soldier, so they buried it without further investigation. It is speculated that this was the person who made it the farthest, and he was the youngest of the 9 crew members. 21 years old, according to this diary, the US military learned that this accident was caused by several factors working together, and the military's radar could only determine direction. They couldn't determine the distance, which resulted in the plane flying over without their knowledge. Additionally, the captain did not see the coastline, nor did he see the signal flare sent by the military. The military, fearing they had flown over, sent up a signal flare, but the captain did not see it. They just flew over directly, and then there's the navigator on the plane. He was unable to provide any assistance. Upon discovering the wreckage of the aircraft, they found an apparatus on the plane known as a navigation computer, which had not been activated at all. Furthermore, the captain instructed everyone to use parachutes. The captain mistakenly believed they were over the sea and ordered everyone to parachute. Had they attempted an emergency landing, their chances would have been better since there was food and a radio on the plane. The captain misjudged, thinking they were near the base, so they began walking. Considering the farthest distance, they walked almost 200 kilometers, yet they were still 500 kilometers from the base. Now, about the crew members, as mentioned earlier, the youngest who made it was 21. Among them, the oldest was the co-pilot, at 27, still young, and the captain was 26. However, a 26-year-old captain was considered quite old among the US military at that time. What was the attrition rate for the US military back then? The US military had a policy at the time that if you could complete 25 flight missions, you would be sent home. You wouldn't need to continue fighting, but on average they didn't make it back after 13 missions. At that time, the US military had a lot of planes, but very few pilots, so they quickly trained pilots for 6 months and then sent them straight into battle. It was quite efficient, much faster than Langxiang. This captain graduated from college and joined the military at 22, retired at 24, and 6 days after retiring, following the attack on Pearl Harbor by Japan, he re-enlisted and became a member of the Air Force, commencing his flight training at the age of 25. This marked his inaugural mission in his personal history, and unfortunately, he went missing during this flight. This was also the plane's first mission, so overall there wasn't anyone experienced on board, and mistakes like these were quite normal. For example, mistaking land for sea and flying past without realizing it. Moreover, since he hadn't flown much, he indeed didn't dare to attempt a forced landing. Parachuting might have been the best choice. Given their next steps, they managed well. For example, firing a flare would move them to a specific spot. Subsequently, they ascertained the accurate direction and proceeded towards the base, which was in accordance with the guidance provided by their desert survival manual. Who would you even need to eliminate anyway? Fortunately, the aircraft was ultimately discovered, although the remains were not recovered. The artifacts from the aircraft were retrieved and exhibited in the United States Air Force Museum, preserved as a significant event in the history of America. This particular aircraft is referred to as Lady Be Good. What is the reason behind this name? The United States Army Air Forces followed a tradition of naming their aircraft after women or names associated with women. Lady Be Good signifies a virtuous woman. It was the title of a highly popular song during that period, and the aircraft was additionally painted in a pink hue. Planes fighting in the desert were painted pink then. The camouflage in the desert was pink and couldn't be seen, so later the United States thought they had crash landed at sea and searched at sea for many years without finding it. So, in many ways, this incident is somewhat similar to the Malaysia Airlines case, as we are now searching at sea. Maybe the combined fragments can't be found because they really aren't in the sea, and those radar signals or other things might have misled people about the direction it was flying.
I once took a flight that was super scary. I thought the plane was gonna crash. It was like a long vertical drop with no feeling of ground, like being weightless. You were floating, really floating, and only the seatbelt kept you in place. Everyone on the plane was screaming. It was terrifying, and the foreigner next to me tried to comfort me. He said, "It's okay, it's probably just turbulence." He hadn't even finished when it happened again. The scariest part was.
Scariest part is when pilot's silent.
Oh, that's truly frightening. The captain remains silent, and everyone in the cabin is loudly screaming.
Like that.
He could potentially be feeling nervous as well.
I believe that particular time did not go well. It was an airplane crash.
Hey, you have already survived a near-death experience.
Indeed, it was that particular flight, and fortunately, I happened to be on it.
If you didn't hold him back.
Stayed, right? It was just a plane crash, you know.
Do you know? Old Wei was comforting you. You were comforting him, right? Can't see the skillful sword god.